Hello everyone and welcome to the EiV Plugin setup tutorial. Today we're just going to be going over how to set up the EiV plugin for blueprints and C++ in Unreal Engine. We're going to be using Unreal Engine 5.1 for this tutorial, but you can follow the exact same process for any other Unreal Engine version supported by EiV. So EiV is a plugin that is a C++ and blueprint library that accesses the underlying Eigen library that is inside of Unreal Engine. Eigen is also a free third-party linear algebra library for C++ that is already inside of Unreal. So what EiV does is it makes it much easier to access the Eigen library, and it translates its functionality into blueprints for you. So you don't have to go through the work of writing out hundreds of blueprint functions yourself just to access something that's already basically inside of Unreal Engine. So for this tutorial, we're just going to be using the EiV plugin setup project, and this is just going to be a C++ project. We can still use blueprints inside of here just fine. This just makes it much easier to work with C++ inside of this project. We don't need any starter content. We're not rendering out anything crazy. We're good to go. So I'm just going to set this project up, and we'll get started with how to activate the plugin. All right, so our project has just loaded up and we are going to activate the EiV plugin for it. So we can go to Edit, Plugins, and EiV is going to be under the Programming category here. So you can go and activate EiV. I'm also going to activate the Visual Studio integration just because we're going to be working with Visual Studio a bit for the C++ portion of this setup tutorial. We need to activate EiV and then we can restart. If you don't see EiV appearing here, it's because it is probably not in your engine's plugin directory. Where EiV should be in your plugins directory is you will go to your engine. For instance, I'm on Unreal Engine 5.1. We will go down into the engine and into our plugins folder. And inside of the plugins folder, we should see a folder called Marketplace. And this is where your EiV plugin should show up. Now it's worth noting that the plugin we have here has a 5.1. The plugins that we will be shipping out will have a 5_1. But anyways, that's a minor detail. So once you have it in this folder, whether you build it yourself or you download it from Fab, it should appear here, and you should be good to restart the engine, and we'll be right back once the engine is running again. All right, the engine just restarted, and now we can see we got EiV and our Visual Studio integration up and running here. So the first thing we're gonna showcase how to do with EiV here is to set it up in blueprints. Now, this is probably one of the nicest features of EiV, in my opinion at least, is that it allows us to have all of these C++ features from the Eigen library right in blueprints, and we don't even have to think about it. We can just go use these nodes, and it's really nice. So we can just create an actor class, new blueprint. The name doesn't matter, unless you care about the name. Name it what you like. So we can just go into our event graph. We don't need to worry about any of these other things. First of all, to see where EiV is, when you go into your context menu here, you should be able to scroll down and see EiV. It's separated because Blueprints just does the auto-separate thing on capitalization. It doesn't take into account unique circumstances such as this one. But we can open it up and we can see all of these blueprint functions. There's many different categories, whatnot, and this is being expanded upon all the time. We are always working to add more blueprint functions because we are only encapsulating a fraction of what the Eigen library has to offer with these. So to explain how you use all of these EiV nodes, what we will first need to do is we will want to convert an Unreal Engine type into an EiV type or an Eigen type. They're essentially the same thing here. We basically created a ton of custom structs that contain all of the data for these types because the data can't natively be displayed in blueprints as is, so we have to create struct wrappers to make sure everything is displayed properly. I am going to go ahead and just make a normal vector using the EiV system. So we can go to vector to eigentype vector. And as we can see, we have this converter node here. And what this does is it will obviously take an execution throughput, and it will take a vector input and an EiV vector input as the EiV vector structure. So this vector input, we can just make a vector, and that's our vector. And this vector that we input will come out as an EiV vector. Now, if we input an EiV vector, it will come out under the normal Unreal Engine vector. This is important to note. I can't pass in a vector and have it pass through to the output vector. It works like an X. So the input goes to the bottom output. The bottom input goes to the top output. Works just like that. So once we have that, this means we'll have access to all of the functions that work with these vectors, which these vectors don't do very much. They're mostly a pass-through type to the dynamic vector type that EiV uses, and these are the general purpose vectors inside of EiV. These also kind of double as matrices as well, because vectors can just be a column matrix that is just one column and that's it. So that's what these are really represented as. So then if we pull this out, we can see we have access to dot product and cross product, pretty usual vector operations. However, we also have access to all of these as well, which are the matrix operations that come with the benefits of this being represented as a matrix. So if we wanted to add vectors, we would actually want to do something more like add matrices, which is why it's not down here under vector operations, because it's really just a matrix operation. If you want to learn more about the subtleties of the design behind this, it's pretty much just a reflection of what the Eigen library does. So you can go check out the Eigen library documentation to get an idea of what's really going on here. But what we can do is we can just look at all of these properties. We can get anything. We can even solve linear systems in here. This is just the base solver. Again, we'll be adding more stuff later. This solver should work for most things, but what we can do, let's just see what this matrix looks like. So we can make a toString, and we can go and print this. And let's have it last for some time that's readable. It's hard to believe it defaults to 2 seconds if you are printing anything substantial, because I can't read stuff that fast if it just pops up suddenly. So set it to 10 seconds. Print string, it's all connected up. So we can compile this. And so we can just throw this in our world, run, and we can see we get the output here of 1, 2, 3, and 0. That's because these dynamic vectors are technically represented as vector 4s, so they can dynamically store all of the data that any Unreal Engine vector type could pass into it. Again, this is what we have to do to make this blueprint compatible. But as we can see, we had 1, 2, 3, and then our W component would be 0. It is 0 since we haven't specified it. And it just passed it through, converted it to a dynamic one to allow for matrix operations. Just took the string, and we can see it's passed right on through correctly. So that's just an incredibly basic introduction. Feel welcome to play around with all of the different operations that there are for these. We also have some rudimentary support for complex valued matrices, which support entries of complex numbers. These are a little more difficult to deal with right now because in order to extract their data, you can either basically clean out the real values. Like we see here, we can strip the imaginary values or strip the real values out of the matrix. So you're left with a matrix of just real values or just imaginary values. This is one way to deal with it. The other thing you can do is transfer a matrix to a list of its elements, and then these elements are complex, so they'll be the complex number structure, which you can then loop through and then turn it into a vector 2D. Again, that's pretty high level stuff you can do with this right here. If you're just getting started, I would just start practicing with the basic matrix stuff. Or if you really know what you're doing, feel free to jump into the complex stuff and bash your head against the keyboard. Anyways, that is pretty much the basic blueprint setup. Here, you will take your Unreal Engine type and you will convert it into the Eigen type. And then you can perform all the operations with the Eigen type as it's struct in the blueprint. And then obviously, if I wanted to, I could pass this back into here if it wasn't on the same node. We can go here and let's just turn it back into a vector. So if I did this instead, this would output this vector here, which would be the same as this over here. So that's pretty much the workflow there for blueprints. Now we can go check out how to set this up in C++. So to do this, we're going to need some C++ classes to show off how this works. So going to create some actor C++ classes. Just create this class, wait for it to get set up. All right, we got one class ready. Let's go make another. I'm just using actor classes for example here. But again, you can use EiV anywhere inside of your Unreal Engine C++. All you need to do is just make sure that you have the right path to the files you need to use, which the path should most of the time be the exact same no matter what. So you shouldn't need to worry about that. I can show you that more when we get to working with the headers and including it as dependencies of modules. Let's create this class, then reload again. All right, live coding is done. And now we have our actor and actor again in here. And I'm also going to go ahead and open up this module's build.cs file because we're going to need this to get EiV working inside of our programs. All right, so both of our actors are there. IntelliSense has correctly colored everything. That's usually an indication that everything is truly ready to go. And so what we need to do to have access to EiV inside of any module we want is inside of our dependencies, we just need to include EiV. That's it. That's all it is. It's incredibly simple. That is all you really need to do to have this in your module. If you wanted to include the Eigen library yourself inside of any module without the help of EiV, there's going to be a lot more pain involved. I can tell you that for sure, as someone that tried to develop this. And so this is for public dependencies. So this is if you want to use this in your H files, your header files. If you want to use this in your actual C++ files, also make sure to include it in your private dependencies as well. Otherwise, you'll get some weird errors. So just make sure you add it to both if you know you will be using it in C++ and your header files. And if you don't know what you're going to be doing yet, just add it to both dependency categories just to be safe. So now that we have it there, what we can do is make sure your generated.h file is always at the bottom of all your includes. Otherwise, some weird stuff can happen. If you don't have a generated.h, make sure you put one there. Again, otherwise some weird stuff will happen. So to include EiV, we'll do include, and then what we will do is we will do ... and then we will go to plugins, and then marketplace, EiV. Now what we will do is we will go to the source, EiV, public, and we will be including the EiV library. Simple as that. This does absolutely nothing. Gonna be honest, this statement here by itself is completely meaningless because when the library is included, it doesn't know what to do. You have yet to tell it to do anything. With EiV, what you do when you include it inside of any of your files is you have to tell it what parts of the Eigen library you want it to bring in with it and what parts you want it to provide utility for. So let's say I am working with just some normal matrix stuff and I just want the bare bones, and I'm also going to be doing a little bit of geometry work. So in this case, we will define EiV include core. So this will just include the core Eigen functionality with this. This essentially just imports the Eigen core module and provides the EiV utility along with it. And then we can also go down here and define EiV include geometry. Now this will include the geometry module from the Eigen library. And lastly, what I want to do here, so I want to define EiV undefine includes. What this will do is this will take these previous two macro definitions up here that tell the EiV library what to do and ensure that they remain local to this file. What this means is when the include statement here pastes in the header file, it will make sure to undefine all of these macros within this file so that these macros appear nowhere else within the module. And this allows for better modularization of your code so that you only have what you need where you need it. Basically, the include what you use policy to make sure you don't have extra unnecessary includes from EiV cascading down to other parts where you don't need it. So it's just useful to I always put this as best practice under my other definitions before my EiV library include to make sure everything stays as compartmentalized as possible. Now, with all this done, we should be able to just go here, make a test function, and we should be able to see that EiV has been included. So if we type in EiV, we see we have the EiV library. Okay, that's a good start. We have the usual plugin setup API that comes with it. That's cool. We have the macros we just included, the API, and this thing, the helper, and that's all we get. And if we look at the helper here too, well, we can go ahead and see, IntelliSense says there's nobody here. There is nobody inside of this struct. So why is this all here? Why is this all doing nothing? I thought we imported EiV. So IntelliSense is a bit weird with the way EiV works, and at least for Visual Studio, there's an easy fix for it. It is important to note that even though IntelliSense says that there is nothing there, I could still go ahead just fine, type out my EiV and Eigen code, and it will compile just fine without any problems. This is, at this point, purely just an IntelliSense issue, but you are good. Once this is in there, you don't need to do anything else. Your code will work just fine when you use the EiV content. But to fix this for IntelliSense, at least in Visual Studio Code, there's kind of a step-by-step process you have to go through here. Also, it's worth noting, for all of these different include macros in the GitHub repository and the documentation, there's a list of all the include macros that you can use and what they do, and what Eigen module they access. So you might want to go check that out if you want to see all that you can do with these. Okay, so basically, now that we have this, we're struggling to use IntelliSense here. So what we'll want to do first is we will want to close our Unreal Editor. Sure, we'll save the content. Yes, we'll save it to a map named Untitled because we're very good at organization here. And what we will do is we will go ahead and build our project. It's important that you do these steps in this order, otherwise IntelliSense may still freak out and you'll have a hard time understanding exactly what may be needed for you to type. Okay, as we can see, everything got built just fine. So now I'm gonna do the engine launch build shortcut. At least for me, that is Control F5. And the editor is launching again. And now we have confirmed everything is built. And as you can see, it did build just fine. There's been no problems with EiV saying I don't exist or anything like that. So now that we're back in the editor, what we need to do is we need to go and refresh the Visual Studio project. Okay, our project should be refreshed. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. Should see this dialog here, and we will click Reload. This will reload everything for this project. Okay, so that's pretty important. And the last step is to go over to Project, go down to your project properties, and go to C++ directories. And then under library directories, we will put library path. And what this will do is this will help Visual Studio connect to the external libraries and kind of have IntelliSense put out its little feelers a bit further to understand what exactly you're working with here. So press OK. It'll think for a bit. As you can tell, everything's colored a bit weird. Once it colors back correctly, it's done thinking. And now if we type EiV, we can see already we have a lot more stuff. We have all of these enumerations and type defs that EiV provides, and we can get started coding in EiV with all this. And there is a lot that EiV provides this way. However, you can also just go type Eigen, and you have full access to the Eigen namespace as well. And this has all that same stuff that you just imported from up here. So what we can do is if we wanted to make a program similar to what we made in our blueprint, we can do the FIV helper. And then this struct provides all the helper functions that go with converting Unreal Engine types to the Eigen types. We look for f vector to vector. We can pop that open. And we'll need an f vector to work with. So we'll make an f vector here, f vector v. This will just be 1, 2, 3 again. And our f vector to vector, if we look at the documentation, it's going to take in a vector to convert and then return an eigenversion of the vector. So if we put in our vector v, we'll see it's already happy, but we want to catch what it's returning. So we can use one of our EiV type defs. In this case, this is going to be a 3D vector. So we can go to vector, can go to 3, and in this case, it's going to be a double, so we'll want a double type vector. This is basically some eigen notation that's come from the eigen library that EiV uses again in its type defs. The reason why all this stuff is type def is because normally you would have to type the whole eigen namespace in front of it, and there's a lot of extra stuff in the templates you'd have to type out. But with this, we can do evec. That is our eigenvector. And with this, we can then go evec. We can do dot, and as we can see, we just immediately have access to all of the properties that the eigen library has for these vectors. And this is incredibly useful. As you can see here, we have a lot of work to do for the blueprints as well. There's a lot of stuff we have to expand out. So that is going to be quite a process, but we will get there. Anyways, so we have that vector there, and then if we wanted to convert it back to an Unreal Engine vector, we can make a new vector, vector 2. Super creative with the naming here. We can get the helper again, and then this time we can do vector f vector from vector. So this will basically do the opposite that this just did. So we can put in our eigenvector here, and then this will return our normal vector. And then in this case, what we would do is we would print it to screen. So we would say if gengine blah, 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 all the usual print to screen stuff. Don't want to type that out. There's plenty of other tutorials that tell you how to put words on the screen. Anyways, that's what we can do here is you can use this workflow. You can do a workflow purely using the eigen library if you want. Now, speaking of using only the eigen library, there's another interesting thing you can do. So if I go over to here, and I'm just going to copy this include because it takes a while to type out. Let's say I want the sparse matrix module from eigen. So we can do, shouldn't be include, this should be define. We can define EiV include sparse core, and this will include all of the sparse matrix functionality that eigen has. And then we can also define EiV undefine includes. But I don't want EiV to provide any of the type defs for this. Let's say I don't want to look at any of those type defs. I hate the little 3 EiV, EiV letters in front of everything. I want to see them gone. I don't want any helper functions. I know what I'm doing. If you want that, what you can do is you can go over to the and define EiV no utility. This will tell EiV, hey, I want you to bring in the eigen headers from here, but don't do any of your own fancy stuff. I just want the header. So essentially what this does is this just replaces this with all the proper conventions for importing this eigen header. And that's mostly it. But it makes it much faster and much more condensed than, again, what the alternatives would be. And then again, what we can do is we can go over here, we can create a test function. Sparse core, it's important to make sure that when you get to the name of the module, there's no spaces. Normally, if I kept going, put that underscore there like I did before. But it's all one word. You can, again, go check out the GitHub documentation to see all these. And so make sure you have it like that. And then you can go down here, just grab your eigen namespace and start working with all your sparse matrices. And have a great time with it. These matrices are sparse everywhere except for the type def list here. Here they are quite dense. But other than that, that's pretty much how to set up eigen and EiV in C++ for Unreal Engine. And this way you can get some really easy linear algebra access inside of Unreal Engine, and it's free. You might as well. So with that, I hope that this tutorial was helpful and helped you get the EiV plugin set up inside of Unreal Engine. If you found this video helpful or informative, don't forget to leave a like. And if you found anything in your own setup process that you found really helpful, you can also comment below what that was. And to stay up to date with more information from us at Galactic Games, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for any new video notifications. And also don't forget to go check out our Discord community, the Galaxy, for customer support and also interaction with other people using products such as EiV. So with that, hope this helped. It's a free product. If you're doing anything with linear algebra, you're thinking, hey, I might want to be using the Eigen library for this. It's really good. It's really fast. Go ahead and just get EiV. It's really quick and easy, and you have the full functionality of Eigen at your fingertips. Thanks for watching. See you next time.